Well, welcome in everyone to Conversations with Dr. Charles. We want to welcome you in. This is actually our first one. And we're doing this because we want to talk about a variety of different health issues that are in the marketplace these days. But particularly, we're going to focus our efforts on immune health and also on gut health. My name is Pat Bryant, and I work on the Emmy brand here. And you can see here a distinguished looking gentleman, Dr. Charles Ackle. Dr. Charles, let me introduce you very quickly to this astute group after I ask them if you like this video and you want to make sure that you can see when we have new content, just click that button below that says subscribe and the bell will sound off if you get notifications and it'll let you know when we've posted new information here, and certainly share that with your friends. So Dr. Charles Ackle, let me give you a quick background on him. If you don't know him, Dr. Charles, as we call him here, is the Chief Medical Officer here at Emmy. He's a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, as you'll find in a moment. He is from the UK and has a wonderful British accent that we enjoy every day. He's been awarded the prestigious Hallett Prize in addition to a number of awards in his undergraduate work. He trained in medicine at Guy's Hospital in London and researched into transplantation and immunology early in his career, obtaining a master's of surgery degree. And Dr. Charles, I think something was born in you with that immunology part that continues to burn brightly today. Lastly, he was a prominent London-based surgeon and a pioneer in the development of laparoscopic surgery and helped to train many of today's excellent surgeons in Europe, and active in establishing a better relationship between private and public partnerships, both in the UK and in Europe. So Dr. Charles, we could go on, but welcome in this morning, and it's wonderful to spend this time with you.
Thank you very much. Gosh, what a great introduction. I hope I live up to it. I've always wanted to try and do what is right, and my interest in research has continued even though I've retired from active surgery. And I think the immunology I've come back to, as you will hear from our discussion.
That's fantastic. So these are just conversations, and that's why we call them Conversations with Dr. Charles. We're going to talk today about Emmy. As you might imagine, we are very excited about Emmy. It's actually launched in the marketplace now. And Dr. Charles, you've been on the beginnings of Emmy for quite a while, and I know how excited you are that we're coming to market with Emmy. It's got a very long and rich story. So why don't we begin at the beginning? What are the roots behind this whole Emmy brand and Emmy product that we've now brought to market?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a long journey. And actually, you have to go back to a wonderful American surgeon called William Coley, who in the 1890s, in what has now become the Sloan Kettering, discovered that sometimes when you have patients who have cancer, and in his case, it was mainly osteosarcoma, cancer of the bone, if the wound got infected with certain organisms, the patients got better. And so we can call him really the father of immunotherapy. And almost every review will start by honoring Dr. William Coley. And he then went on to try and leverage this by using toxins and extracts to try and make sure that every patient who had cancer would respond. But as always, nature and the immune system makes it very complex. And once chemotherapy, radiation came in, it all fell into the background. I mean, so much so that when I was a kid in the 1960s, a young doctor, we used to use BCG. BCG is the vaccine for tuberculosis and is a milder form, if you like, of TB, which is a nasty infection, and it's a vaccine. What we had two things with that. One was that we were using it to try and induce an immune reaction in certain cancers. And I remember as a kid injecting melanoma, which is a nasty malignant skin disease, with BCG to induce a response. And what was interesting was the first time you injected it, you got a terrific response. The thing melted away. Then when it sort of crept back again, you gave a second dose, not so good. Then you gave a third dose. Actually, it almost made it worse. And this is because BCG is really a cousin to TB, which is a bad egg. It's not a good bacteria. So the other factor about BCG is that it doesn't work as a vaccine against TB for everybody. You have to be under the age of 3 and you get a good response. And there's something else in the environment that seems to induce a good response. And dear old John Stanford, who was a fantastic professor, he looked like Jeremiah. He had a beard, that birds could nest in. He was the sort of archetypal mad professor. He was wonderful. But he traveled all over the world, and he had an interest in bacteria and mycobacteria in particular. And he wanted to find out why did some countries have a fantastic response to BCG, others didn't. And there was also the observation that if you gave BCG under the age of 3, and this has been strongly corroborated now, in later life, not only were you protected against TB, you got protection against certain cancers. And that was interesting. So he and his team went out to a place in Africa on the shores of what was known Lake Kyoga in Uganda, modern day Uganda. And there were 10 or 11 villages that were all near the lake who were farmers and cattle herders. And in these 11 villages, they vaccinated everybody. But the only people who responded were the cattle farmers who lived near the lake. The other 10 villages didn't respond. So John Stanford and his team, and Graham Rook was involved in this. And if you look at the literature, you'll find that Stanford and Rook are really strongly mentioned in all this. They surmised that there had to be something in the environment that was triggering this beneficial response. So they looked at everything. They took soil samples, hippopotamus poo, I mean, anything you could think of. And they looked to see what was a consistent difference between these people who were by the lake and those who were away from the lake. And what they found was that in the mud of the lake, there was an organism that they then called Mycobacterium vaccae for cow. Mm-hmm. We now know that it's not the archetypal vaccae. We've called it Kyogaense after Lake Kyoga, where it was found. But that's a detail. But you look under Mycobacterium vaccae, you'll find lots of information. And what they did was they then created a vaccine from the vaccae and put it into these patients who were not responding. And lo and behold, they got a dramatic response. I mean, it was a fantastic response. Mm-hmm. And so this is the concept that I talk about, and we know in science, as an adjuvant, the immunoadjuvant story that we mentioned. And that means that everything needs a broker. I mean, you can't go and buy shares in the stock market without a broker. You can't have an orchestra playing properly without a conductor and music. In the same way, the immune system needs a broker to direct it in the right direction. And most vaccines that we think about today, including the old conventional non-cellular vaccines, all need something to make them work properly. And tetanus vaccine, for example, which we've all had, needs aluminium. It's put onto aluminium, which then induces a reaction, makes it work better. So
for our American listeners, that's aluminum.
Aluminum. I beg your pardon. It's my English accent. You must forgive me. So aluminum, yeah. And but in cellular innate immunity, you still need an adjuvant. It took us a long time to work that out. Anyway, they started doing this thing for TB, but in the same process, there was another member of the team, Professor John Grange, who was a dear friend and one of the loveliest men you could imagine. And dear John was very kind, and he was involved with seeing a woman with a massive breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, why are you bothering to vaccinate her? Because she's going to be dead very quickly. What's the point? And he's a good man. And he said, look, I don't care. I'm going to give it to her. And do you know what? The tumor melted away. So, and it came back later, but there was a response in the tumor. And he thought, well, this is odd. And it was he who then said, look, there's something much more important going on with these mycobacteria than just TB. There's a lot more relationship with the immune system that is creating a benefit. And actually, He and particularly Graham Rook has published extensively on this fact that you need to retain the relationship with your environment. One of the things we've lost today, living in big cities and houses that are made of concrete, we don't have grass, we don't have trees, we don't let the kids play in the mud. The rural urban disjunct, if you like, it has become a big problem for modern man. And somewhere in this, you need exposure to things like the mycobacteria, which are present in soil and throughout the environment. This brings us down. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to interject a question there. So you've talked about Mycobacteria vaccae. I'm probably mispronouncing it based on what you said. And I know that there's multiple strains of Mycolici bacteria that are found in Emmy. What's the connection between those two?
Very good. Well, the answer is that there are about 180 to 200 described mycobacterial species. And the great majority are pretty tame. They don't cause any harm. But there are two or three that are very bad and naughty. One is tuberculosis, and there are various forms of TB that affect cattle or badgers or humans. And the other forms, leprosy is caused by tuberculosis. Leprosy is a biblical disease, and you would have thought it doesn't exist anymore. I can assure you leprosy is still out there and good and strong. So leprosy is caused by mycobacteria. More recently, the mycobacterial class, if you like, has been reclassified into 4 different groups, of which one is called the Mycolicibacter. And the Mycolicibacter, we specifically like that because it identifies all those subspecies of Mycobacterium that are entirely innocuous and benign and harmless. Because the minute you mention mycobacteria to most people, they go, oh my God, it's TB. Oh, I'm not having this, and it's nonsense. It's the difference between a jet fighter and a civilian aircraft. They're not doing the same job, right? So that's why we've classified it as Mycolicibacter. Now, vaccae is part of that Mycolicibacter group, as is a sister organism called Mycobacterium obuense, which I spent a lot of time developing as an anti-cancer agent. And by the way, a lot of work was done on vaccae in cancer and various other conditions, which is why we have a lot of information about the way this organism interacts. Of course, we had it all wrong. 20 years ago, we had no idea about how the best way to work. We didn't know about adjuvants. We didn't know about checkpoint inhibitors. We didn't know the details. I was always very much of the view that the immune system is critical in cancer. And just to tell you a story, when in 2007, so it's not that long ago, I was given the job of granting 10 million pounds sterling. In those days, it was about $15 million.
Wow.
By a grateful patient of mine who thought, because I'd operated on him and on his cancer and he'd survived, that it had something to do with me.
I would be a great patient too, Dr. Charles.
Well, you have to be humble, especially in surgery and medicine. If you're not humble and you think it's all down to you, you got some big fall coming. But, there's usually a higher authority that decides these things. And before you get to that higher authority, you've got to go through the immune system, I can assure you. So he gave me this $15 million, and I went to see a very eminent professor of cancer at a very eminent university in the United States, in the UK, and I won't tell you which, so as not to embarrass him. The professor, who was a specialist in lung cancer, said to me, and I quote, I said to him, here's 10 million pounds. And he said, great, thank you very much. I said, yeah, but there's a condition. You've got to check out the relationship between cancer and immunology. The lab has got to be to look at the immunology of cancer. And he said, and I quote, what has immunology got to do with cancer? And my jaw dropped open. I couldn't believe this from an eminent professor, because I'd worked in transplantation and including stem cell and bone marrow transplantation. And I knew that if we transplanted somebody and they had a small skin tumor, which is common, it wouldn't stop us transplanting, they all got a little bit of what we call graft versus host. The graft would also retain some of its power and attack the host. This is why when you transplant kidneys and livers, you have to immunosuppress the patient to stop the thing.
Right, exactly.
It also works the other way. Cells from the graft can attack the host. And in this situation, in bone marrow transplants, the graft will sometimes attack the cancer and it'll disappear. And I've seen this in other conditions. And I think, that's weird. And then if there's time, I'll tell you another story as to why that is important in cancer. And we'll come back to IMI to finish. We had this experience, and my good friend who basically put liver transplantation on the map is Professor Sir Roy Khan, who, God rest his soul, died just a few days ago. He was a dear friend. He was one of the giants. I'll be forgotten in 5 years after I die. He will be remembered in 500 years. And he was involved with a patient who this chap died and donated his kidneys, and we put the kidneys into 2 different people. And after a while, both patients with the kidneys, because they were immunosuppressed, developed malignant melanoma. They were covered in malignant melanoma. We thought, well, this is odd. Where did that come from? Because the melanomas were identical. So it had to have come from the donor. And the donor had been checked out very carefully. There was no sign of any cancer, because we don't do that. However, 20 years before, he'd had a malignant mole removed from his hand, and that was the melanoma that had suddenly lit up. So what was that melanoma doing for 20 years, right? It was sitting there quietly because the immune system had locked it down and shut it up. As soon as it was released, out it came into these 2 patients. Wow. Well, by the time we'd worked it out, sadly, 1 patient had died. The other one, we removed the kidney, stopped the immunosuppression, and his immune system kicked in and the melanoma disappeared.
Amazing.
Well, I mean, if you wanted an experiment that was better, how good is that?
How good is that? Well, and here's what we're going to do. We've talked about, we're going to keep these 10 to 15 minutes in length, and we've hit that time. It went like that because it's just so engaging to listen to you. But this is like a great Netflix video where we're going to leave them hanging. So the only way that you can get the rest of the story on Emmy is to come back, and we're going to do another session exactly like this. And hopefully, sorry, we had a phone call in the middle there. And hopefully it's something that people will come back. I think they will. By the way, if you'd like more information on Emmy, be sure to go to emmy.co, emmy.co, and that's our website. You'll find out great information there. You'll see videos from Dr. Charles, but also on this YouTube channel. Again, if you've not subscribed, be sure to hit the button below. And we look forward to seeing you again. And Dr. Charles, let's do this again. We're going to finish the Emmy story. So hopefully everyone will tune in. Great to be with you this morning.
My pleasure.